Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 218. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today, Jamie Mackay. Jamie, how are we doing?
Very good, thanks, Ben. How are you?
All good, thank you, mate. I feel lucky because this would probably normally be you being in a different country, a slightly different country, which we'll get into in a second. But I've caught you back in the UK.
Yeah, no, it's nice to be back for a Christmas break. So back home with mum and dad at the moment, enjoying some time off.
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant. Well, we'll get into your role and where you're based in a second, but we always start in the same place on the podcast. So can you go into a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, so I'm from England, obviously. Went to school here, studied uni here. I was at St Mary's up in Twickenham, and I did strength and conditioning science, I believe was the correct term of the course, and did that for 3 years. Was kind of messing about with some internships during that time, but yeah, nothing too serious really. And then it was getting to the end of my degree, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work in professional sport, but it was kind of my only goal really. I didn't have a specific sport to work in or a location that I wanted to be in. But the other thing was I wanted to travel. So those were the two kind of big factors for me. And then I think it was maybe May, so a month or two before we were finishing uni, and the university had sent out an internship opportunity in Sweden, and so that instantly took my eye. I'd never been to Sweden before, and it was in a professional club in Malmo for a year. And I thought that would be kind of perfect, really, a bit of both the professional sport and then the travel. I applied for that, and had an interview with Mark and Ben, and then I think it was 6 weeks later, and I was on a plane out to Sweden. So it all happened quite quickly after uni. And then. Had planned to be there for a year, and then a year turned into a 6-month extension, and then that turned into a full year contract, and then another 2 years, and 5.5 years later, and I'm still there. So it's been an interesting journey, but I am very grateful for the experience that I've had moving abroad and kind of immersing myself in a different culture. And obviously working in pro sport has been really, really interesting. And I mean, myself, I'm not a football guy. I played rugby growing up, so it was a bit of a culture shock. First few weeks, certainly, coming into the club. But I've definitely learned a lot from Ben and Mark over the years. So it's been, for me, it's been a really great experience. I don't think I'd have done it any differently.
Yeah, brilliant. Mark's obviously been on, I was going to say recently, it's probably a while ago now that his last episode was actually on. So he discussed some of the work that's going on over at Malmo. But in terms of your role, Jamie, what's your role, and what does that include at the moment in terms of who you're working with?
So my current role, I've been with the first team for the whole 5 years. My current role, I guess last year, it kind of transitioned more into like a rehab S&C coach role. Since this whole year, and I've been kind of responsible for the return to play side of things, and kind of bridging the gap between the physios and getting the guys back into full training. So that's been really interesting for me. That was, before that, it was kind of more assistant role, and kind of just helping out where I was needed, and assisting with the team trainings and getting the guys prepped for training and the gym sessions and that kind of stuff. But the last few years, I've kind of feel that I've had more responsibility in terms of actually being responsible for a specific part of the process.
Part of that rehab process we're going to get into in a little bit as well. But you just mentioned then, from your rugby background, I'm guessing that was like a playing background, was it? Um, what and the culture shock of stepping into football. What were some of the initial shocks for you then coming into football?
So, I mean, the first one was I think I'd been here maybe a week or two, and I'd seen the schedule. Ben, who was my boss at the time, was showing me the schedule, and I asked him, "So when are we going to do the gym sessions? When are we going to fit those in?" And he was like, "Well, we've got a game on Saturday, we've got another game on Tuesday, and then another game on Saturday. So when would you put them in?" And then I was kind of thinking to myself, "Oh no, there's no gym training here. What am I doing?" But then it was kind of that learning process of okay, in those congested schedules, the gym is not such a big or doesn't have such a big role in terms of especially when you're in the thick of the season. I joined in June, so it was kind of that European qualification process. So we were traveling every midweek to different clubs in Europe, and so that was kind of the biggest shock for me, is that there was a lesser focus on the strength training side of things, coming from that rugby background where they're in the gym 2 or 3 times a week. So that was the biggest shock for me. And then kind of from there, it was the process of learning, okay, when can we fit the sessions in if we need to, and do we split the group up into the starters and the non-starters and the non-traveling team, and okay, maybe we can train with those guys here, and then if we can, get the starters in later on in the week, or looking towards next week, and kind of managing it slightly differently, rather than having that kind of one size fits all approach.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting speaking to people from different sports, different experiences, because the world of football is a strange one, isn't it? Like you say, with fixtures and many other aspects to it as well. So I think it's really refreshing sometimes to get a different set of eyes on the challenges that people face. And I'm sure there's some of the conversations like you just mentioned then with Ben and Mark, and I'm sure they appreciated your input on it as well.
Yeah. No, it's been a really interesting journey, and I wouldn't do it any differently now. I don't think I'd want to go and work in professional rugby now, because I've kind of immersed myself in the football side of things, and now I feel like I have quite a good understanding of managing that process, and organising the training around the football schedule, because obviously that is priority number one, is winning the games. But it's been a really interesting learning process for me, that's for sure.
And with that move, Jamie, obviously you mentioned before that we've spoke on the podcast recently about getting your personal values in check and really thinking about what you want out of a career. And you mentioned straight away from the get-go that traveling was part of that. So with the move out to Sweden, what have you felt have been some of the, I know it's hard to compare because you've not stayed in the UK, but in terms of with that move, what have you felt of some of the biggest benefits from going out there?
For me, it's the big thing about moving abroad was just kind of immersing myself in a different culture. And I went traveling after school, so between school and uni. I went down to New Zealand for 9 months, and kind of did the same, played some rugby out there, found a job, met some friends, made some new memories, which was good. And I really enjoyed that kind of experience of going somewhere completely different, not knowing anyone, and then having to almost start again in terms of building your social circles and things like that. So that was kind of, I think it was from that traveling experience that drove me to kind of want to go and see more of the world and live in a new country. So that's been really powerful for me. And then the other thing is, obviously in New Zealand they speak English. In Sweden they don't. So it was the first 6 months I was there, we had a Swedish manager, so all of the meetings was in Swedish, everything a lot of the players were Swedish as well, so everything was kind of Swedish, and I was kind of sitting there pretending to listen to the conversation and actually having no idea what was going on. And then I'd always have to ask Ben, so what was that about? Anything I should know? So that was interesting. And I mean, even now my Swedish is awful. I can understand a little bit more, but it's nowhere near where it should be for being here for 5 years. The good thing is now that we do have more of an international squad, and we've had a few international managers in over the last few years. So the club's kind of shifted to being more English speaking, which is great for me, but it's not great for my Swedish learning.
Yeah.
So, the language one is, the language learning at least is kind of dropped off on the priority list. And the other thing is, in Sweden, everyone speaks perfect English. So you walk into a coffee shop and I try and practice my Swedish ordering in Swedish, and then they understand that I'm a foreigner and it's not my best language, so they'll just reply in English.
Yeah.
And it's, well, okay, what's the point? So that's it's been interesting having to kind of attempt to learn a new language. At least I was never very good at school, so I mean, all of those years of French and Spanish learning went straight out the window. And it was, now I kind of wish I'd focused a little bit more on those classes. But yeah, it's been a really good experience, kind of moving away from England, and I guess starting again, really building a new friendship circle, and immersing myself in the Swedish culture.
You've referenced that, obviously immersing yourself in the culture over there, but also with the travel. Like, it's not something personally I've done, but I know a lot of people have done it, and it is putting yourself out there to a point, isn't it? And you're putting yourself in a position similar to, I suppose, learning a language, where you have to go and create relationships. Do you feel that before you went traveling, you had that sort of skill or attribute of being able to create a relationship or a friendship like that, or did that really come on and be created when you were away?
Yeah, I think I was I've always had like a close-knit group of friends from when I was really young, junior school, so I never really had to go and branch out almost and build those new relationships. But yeah, for me, having that experience and going away and having to do all that kind of thing, I found that was maybe something that I was actually quite good at, and that's then transitioned into the football side of things, and being able to build relationships with the players and kind of communicate with them on a maybe more friend to friend level rather than coach to athlete side of things. But there's always that balance of okay, don't get too close with the players. You still have to be in charge and that kind of things. But for me now, I look at it as one of my skills. I can kind of go and immerse myself in a different culture, and I'm very comfortable with being able to make friends quite quickly, and I don't see that as a big challenge for me anymore. I do think that experience of going away after school before uni did really help with I guess developing that skill, and or actually figuring out that I could actually go and do that, having not had to do so much of it before.
Yeah, I was going to say, a couple of episodes ago with Max Kane, we spoke about sort of non-specific environments for developing yourself as a practitioner, and that's basically what that's tying into, isn't it? Like, I'm sure at the time playing rugby in New Zealand, you weren't thinking, when I'm going to be in Sweden with a team of footballers, this is going to be some of the skills that I'm going to utilize. But it's being that sponge in that environment, isn't it? And testing yourself and stepping outside that comfort zone of putting yourself in situations where you have to do it. And that doesn't obviously have to be traveling to the other side of the world. It might be in a certain job doing whatever where you're slightly uncomfortable and developing certain skill sets.
Exactly. Yeah. Or yeah, starting a new sport, joining a new sports team, and having
Yeah.
to make those relationships and friendships there. And I do really value that as one of my skills or abilities to do. And yeah, kind of, I would feel very comfortable being dropped in any location, and yeah, be able to figure things out and make some friends. And
Yeah, bro. How have you found that process? Because you mentioned about some internships early on, and then getting into full-time employment, obviously over in Sweden with Malmo and with the practitioners that you sort of mentioned already. How's that process been for you?
Yeah, so both my internships were in rugby. So that kind of ties back into the story of when are we going to do the strength training. It was yeah, they were both part-time. One was at a local school in Twickenham while I was at uni, and then the other was with the university team. So those were the guys that I was playing with, and I was kind of managing their strength and conditioning. So one of those, the one with the university team, I was the lead of that. So yeah, that was kind of my first lead role, where I was responsible for actually designing the program, managing the program, and organizing everything. And looking back now, I would have done things so differently. I almost cringe at looking back at the old programs that I'd written, but then we'll see in the old videos of that we had from the training. And then the other thing that ties into that is I was part of the team, so I was supposed to be doing the S&C stuff as well, and I wasn't. I was just coaching, as a good coach should do. But then I ended up tearing my own ACL, not done any strength training for the year, and so that was a bit of a nightmare, but a good experience, I could say. Anyway, yeah. So then, kind of having done that before I'd started, it kind of gave me an idea. Okay, this is how I would do things, and then seeing how things were being done at Malmo, it was interesting to see the difference. So that was kind of the learning side of things for me was yeah, seeing, okay, what works, what doesn't work, how can we adapt this to the environment we're in now. But I do think that I would, if I had gone back and done uni again, I would have tried to immerse myself in some more different sports or more internships, and yeah, gone out and tried to get some more experience, really.
It's hard at that point though, isn't it? Because you being in the position now, 5+ years into a role where you sort of know the things that you're going to be responsible for on a day-to-day basis, but also probably the stuff that you're interested in and know that you've got to get better at. It's kind of like at this point now, that's when you want that experience, isn't it? Because or the education, because that's when you know what specifically you need.
Exactly. And when you're at uni, you're kind of not thinking that far in the future.
Yeah.
Thinking maybe 6 months or a year into the future, and it's yeah, it's I mean, you do get presented with the opportunities, or I did, at least at university, and it was kind of like I wasn't really thinking about that, and it was more, well, I'm still not really sure what I want to do after uni. So yeah, I guess I'm lucky things turned out the way they did, and I was able to have that internship lined up after uni, and then lucky again to have it turn into a full-time role, where I have been able to sharpen the saw, as they say, and continue learning.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned there about your own ACL. I'd love to know the percentage of coaches that have actually been through an injury like that, because that's probably where you do the most learning as a coach, isn't it? When you have to sort of go through a process like that yourself.
100%, yeah.
But on that as well, I know we spoke about this before the episode. I know you've been through a few rehab processes of an ACL with a few players now. So I thought it'd be good to sort of jump into this and go through maybe some initial learnings that you've taken from the players that you've helped rehab.
Yeah. So yeah, we had I think it was 2019 maybe. One of the guys who was out on loan had done his ACL, and he was the first big injury that I was responsible for. So that was a big turning point in my career. I feel, from being an intern and then being an assistant role to actually having some responsibility for returning a guy from an ACL injury.
Yeah.
Now, when I did my ACL, I didn't do the rehab as I should have done.
The prehab or the rehab.
Exactly. It was a lot more of experimenting with things and trying out new methods and exercises. But I think the big part of an ACL is the mental side of things, and actually because as soon as you do it, you think, oh, it's 9 months. That's such a long time, and it is in a footballer's career. So having that experience and having been through the process of returning from injury, despite it taking a lot longer for me than it should have, I felt like I could almost relate a bit more closely with the players going through that process. So that was kind of my first big responsibility, and to be honest, I felt a little bit out of my depth, and there was that imposter syndrome kind of kicking in, being telling me, well, you couldn't do your own ACL, so how can you be responsible for someone else's? So there was a lot of reading around the subject, and then I came across obviously Matt Taberner's work, the Control to Chaos Continuum, and that was really, really helpful for us. And then from that, we kind of, myself and Mark, developed a system, I guess, and we took that idea, the Control to Chaos idea, and applied it to everything. So the technical drills and technical drills, and then the acceleration, deceleration, change of direction stuff, and kind of developed a process of how we can progress each task through that continuum. So having done that, then it kind of helped me with the guide, because then everything felt kind of laid out and structured in a nice, perfect way. And obviously you start with the plan, and then after the first session, the plan goes out the window and you start to change things and adapt it to the athlete. But having that structure in place was really valuable for me. And I wish I'd had it when I was doing my own rehab, but we can't have everything. So that was once we'd got that in place, I felt much more comfortable taking this guy back through the process. And then, I mean, the big thing for me is once you get them back into the team training and then back to playing, I felt it was so rewarding as a coach, having seen them from the very beginning all the way through, and then back on the pitch and scoring goals and performing their best. That was I felt very, very, very proud of the athlete for the amount of work that they put in, and so that was a really big part of my career. And then since then we've had a few more, unfortunately, ACL injuries, but I've been able to refine the process a little bit more and adapt it to each athlete each time, and so now I'm starting to get to the point where I do feel very comfortable in that situation, having that responsibility and managing that process.
So has there been a much more sort of minor tweaks and changes to that program once you'd utilised that system? Obviously, Matt's Control to Chaos, and you agreed that with Mark. after that, when you had these other instances of players going through the process, was it just a case of just minor tweaks to it from there?
Exactly, yeah. Some guys moved through it a little bit more quickly than others, and others we spent a little bit more time at each stage. But the kind of the pathway was there. It was just adapting it to the individual athlete and how they were responding to the different drills and the sessions overall. So it was really useful to have that in place before starting it, and then you kind of get the feedback loop from each time. Once one guy goes through it, then we can relook at it and see what worked and what didn't work for that athlete, and then maybe make some adjustments the next time someone has to go through it. Touch wood, we don't have any more. But
yeah, definitely. But you've mentioned there about different players going through it, and obviously different players going through it brings different personalities. And you've also said about the sort of psychological side, and the fact that you can relate to them is one thing, but also it's dealing with each individual, isn't it?
exactly.
Like you've got players that are going to be reacting completely different ways depending on maybe their history. It could be the first ever injury, they could have had the injury before. So how have you found that in terms of that support network, I suppose, you have to be for that player, as well as all the technical side and creating the system? You have to also be that support for them as well, don't you?
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I think for anyone who does do the ACL, it does almost feel like the end of the world when it first happens, and you do feel so far away from being back playing again, and obviously for them it's their career, so it's yeah, it kind of does rock the boat for them a lot. So yeah, for me, being in that position where I'm kind of working one-to-one with them and able to, again, back to the relationship side of things, develop or strengthen the relationship that I've built with them around that side of things, I think that really helps with the process. And obviously it comes down to building trust with them. So if they trust that you know what you're talking about, and you know the process, and that you've been successful with the process before, then everything gets much easier. So yeah, I think for me the experience of doing my own ACL was at the time not great, but in the long run, now it was so valuable, and I don't think I would change that actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's that's been important for me.
And is there any instances that the program needed changing because of players' reactions to it? And I don't necessarily mean physical, I mean more sort of the mental side. Was there any points, so you don't obviously have to name names or anything like that, but was there any times that you just had to change it because the player wasn't reacting the way you wanted them to?
Not so much because they weren't reacting the way we wanted them to, but more we had to change it based on how they were performing at each level. So some guys moved through each phase a lot more quickly than others. Others we had to spend a little bit more time building up their capacity at the specific levels. Yeah, so I mean, it was, each one is different, obviously. But in terms of the structures, pretty much stayed the same from high control all the way to high chaos.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the it would just be the moving them through at different speeds. So maybe we'd spend 6 sessions on each phase with one athlete, and then 4 sessions on each phase with another. It would kind of depend on their injury and how the ACL was repaired, and what kind of specific details we needed to take into account based on that. And then again, the age of the player obviously plays quite a big factor in that, and part of their career, or what part of their career they're in, affects it whether we're pushing them back to get ready for the last season, or we have a little bit more time and less stress. So with with some of them, it was like they were kind of coming back towards the end of the season. So that meant, okay, we could take things a little bit more slowly because we've got the whole off season and pre-season to get ready for games. And with others, it was like our target would be beginning of the season. So then maybe we'd have to move things on a little bit more quickly and get them ready for beginning of the season. So it's situational things that kind of played the biggest role in how we were going to progress each guy through that.
If you were to give a couple of pieces of advice from your experiences over the different rehabs that you've done, Jamie, if there's anyone listening maybe that is possibly going into a process with a player or during a process or maybe just for the future as well, what would be maybe a couple of things you'd highlight for them or a couple of top tips?
I mean, for me, I think the most important thing is using the staff around you. So keeping close contact with the physios and the other performance staff and the coaches as well, and kind of keeping everyone in the loop about what the plan is and are we pushing them for, or when are we trying to push them back for, and how are we progressing from the physio side of things and how the athlete is responding to each session. So keeping those lines of communication very open, and again, even with the athlete as well. So making sure they understand the process and where they are and where they're going, because I think that is very beneficial for them if they can see the plan and see where they are now and where they're going. I think that helps reinforce the idea that they're not actually that far away from being back to where they need to be.
Yeah.
That, and then obviously reading the research. I don't think you can read enough around ACL injuries, and obviously there's always new stuff coming out and new ideas around how things should be done. But I mean, it's always an experimental process. So some things obviously don't work in certain environments. So it's kind of about experimenting with what you think works and how your philosophy is around the subject. So it's it's that multifaceted approach.
Definitely. No, that's some great advice, mate. Just before we move on to some of the quick fire questions, Jamie, I know another thing we were going to talk about is the side hustle that you've got going on. So I think this will be really beneficial for coaches, because a lot of people will talk about this, but actually putting it into action and creating a business is a whole other thing, isn't it? So can you give a little bit on what it is in terms of the side hustle, but also how you went about creating it and how it's running now?
Yeah. So everyone always talks about the importance of having that side hustle income to protect you against the nature of football, I guess, because ultimately we don't know how long we're going to be in a position. So I've always had this idea that I wanted to do some stuff on the side, and I think it was last year, around this time last year, where I really started dedicating some time to it. And for me, the biggest shock was the amount of new things I have to learn about. So everything from the marketing to the sales process to the legal side of things, and even down to managing taxes. I had no idea what I was doing with any of it. So it took me, it was last year, maybe 11 months before I actually got around to getting everything ready to go and releasing something. So it was a long process, and a lot of my learning this year has been around that, the business side of things, and setting up a business and being able to market something and actually sell something that is going to work. So it was far more skills than I was kind of expecting. I assumed it would just be string conditioning and then someone's going to buy it, but it's not that easy. So that is something that I'm really excited about now, is yeah, kind of understanding that process of being able to take an idea and then figuring out how to take it to market and how to actually sell it. And then now is the process of actually fulfilling on that, the promise, and yeah, kind of managing my time alongside the work. So it's been a learning curve, that's for sure, and I think we're kind of getting to the point where I understand what's going on and how to manage things. But I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near perfect. So again, a lot of reading around that and business podcasts and yeah, learning that kind of things. I think yeah, the main thing for me is I wish I'd actually started it this time last year and actually just dove in and yeah, because I think I'd be in a much better position now. But it's Stephen Pressfield talks about it in The War of Art. It's the what does he call it? Resistance. It's the idea of, okay, you're not ready to do it now, you can do it later, and it's yeah, kind of pushing that to the side and just getting on with things. And I mean, there's plenty of resources online that you can learn how to do it, and yeah. So for me, that was it's been an interesting learning experience. But yeah, I wish I'd started it sooner.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because it's kind of like what we touched on before with getting like the first role, getting exposed to the first rehab process. Like you're never fully ready, are you? Like you've got to kind of learn on the job to a point. So what I'd say is if people have got ideas, you need to get started with it, don't you? Because otherwise it can just be an idea that runs and runs and runs forever and you don't actually do anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the more people you read about as well that have started businesses, they've all had that period where they've learned a hell of a lot of lessons.
Yeah.
So you're not by yourself, are you, when you're going through that period?
No, exactly. I think no one knows what they're doing when they start.
No.
And the trouble is, we see on Instagram these days of people running successful businesses, and you just feel so far away from that. And I guess it's the same as the ACL stuff. When you first get injured, you're so far away from playing.
Yeah.
It's about chunking it up and taking it in small steps and yeah, working towards that goal each day. So if you've managing your tasks really, and finding out what boxes you need to tick for that day and doing them and moving through the process.
There's also that sort of swan analogy of a lot of things you see, isn't it? That on the surface things look great, like everything's moving. It's the business that I want. They're running the business that I want, but underneath, it's just chaos.
Exactly.
And that's like it's hard to know sometimes unless you truly know someone, isn't it? Like I suppose that's part of social media, that you see a snapshot of what's going on without truly knowing about what the business is doing.
No, exactly. It's just the highlight reel on socials. So
Literally that. Yeah, literally that. With that, Jamie, as well, because there might be people listening thinking, with my job, like where am I going to find the time to put any time or effort into something like external or away from what I do? What would be your advice from that? Like, where have you found that?
yeah, so for me, I'm also learning this currently. So it's we're in the off season now, so I do have a little bit more time to dedicate to it. But I think starting small is better than not starting at all. So I mean, you don't have to run a massive business alongside your work, but
Yeah,
starting something, you can kind of figure out, okay, how much time do I need to dedicate to this process? And for everyone, it's a learning curve and it's a learning process, and it's going to be different depending on what kind of business you want to run and how you want to run it. Will dictate how much time you need to spend to it, but no one really knows until they actually do it and until you refine the process. Obviously, as you grow in the business and you get your systems in place, you can kind of reduce the time it takes or the time you need to spend on it. But at the beginning, there is a lot of learning that you need to go through, and that does take up quite a lot of time. So yeah, it's for me, it was kind of I enjoyed that process. I mean, it was, you'd get back from work and it would be late, and then you'd spend 2 or 3 hours reading about business side of the marketing and the sales process, and okay, setting up a website or yeah, managing that kind of thing. So I didn't really see that as work at the time. It was more learning a skill. So for me, I really enjoyed that process of yeah, learning about something I knew nothing about. Yeah.
Yeah, there's obviously a passion there for you to learn, isn't there? So what you're doing there is you're creating time, you're creating opportunities for you to get stuck into the research or whatever you need to do. And that's the thing, isn't it? When you've got something that you're passionate about, you will find the time. If anyone watches anything on Netflix or spends any time on social media, we've got some time to do something.
Exactly.
So it just depends whether you want to or not, doesn't it? And that's probably the difference.
Yeah, it's choosing how you spend your time rather than
100%. Yeah, 100%. If you can get through the whole Game of Thrones or something like that, you've got plenty of time.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Mate, quality. Let's get on to some of the quick fire questions. You've mentioned already a few influences, so I'm sure the likes of Mark Reed and Ben and probably Matt Taberner and others as well will be included in this list. But are there any other influences that you feel have really impacted your career so far?
Yeah, I mean, I feel Carl Dietz, his work has had a big impact on me in terms of how we kind of do things. Yeah, and then yeah, I guess that would be it. I mean, obviously you read books and stuff from around the SSC side of things, and I quite enjoyed the is it the Advanced Principles of SSC? Those books that kind of break it down into chapters, and then you can kind of get through it in bite-sized chunks. Have been pretty good. Martin Bichette as well as I really enjoy his stuff on the high intensity interval training.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess those would be the big ones for me.
Brilliant. And what would you say your biggest skill or biggest strength is as a practitioner?
I think it is that relationship building and the stuff that I've learned in my personal life, and being able to take those skills and apply them to the professional setting, and building those relationships with athletes where they're at a point where they're both willing to trust you and believe in what you believe in the process that you're taking them through, I guess.
Brilliant. And if you were to speak to Jamie back in New Zealand playing rugby, about to set out on this S&C career, what would be your top bit of career advice? I know it's not that long ago as well, so we're not talking like years and years ago. We're only talking a few years ago.
I mean, for me, it's the experience. So go and work in as many different sports as you can, and get as much experience under your belt before you're at a position where you need to, or before you leave uni. Really, that would be the big thing for me. Immerse yourself in strength and conditioning and sports science, and see as much as you can, and learn as much as you can before you're in a position where you actually need to find a job.
You just talked about learning there. So the one I always finish up with asking is your approach to CPD, continued learning. How do you go about that? Is that something that is, obviously it is a real focus at the moment because we've sort of touched on it already, but just on the back of that as well, I'm going to get a couple of recommendations from you, whether that's for S&C or whether that's for business as well. If you could give a few of those, that's just for personal interest.
Yeah. So S&C side of things, yeah, podcast is probably my go-to for learning. So obviously this one, Football Fitness Federation, is a great resource.
Can you tell a Payden?
And I enjoy the Pacey Performance podcast as well. Those are probably my go-to for S&C side of things. And then in terms of the business side, I like Alex Hormozy, The Game. That's that's very good. And then my first million is also quite interesting.
I've heard about this. I've not listened to it yet.
No, there's some really good guests on. Yeah, business entrepreneurs, and it's really interesting to kind of see that side of things. Granted, they are running multi-million-dollar companies, but it's always good to have a vision.
Yeah,
So,
and there's lessons in everything, isn't there?
Exactly. Exactly.
Who runs that, Jamie?
Sam Parr and Sean Puri. Butchered the name, but yeah,
Don't know them.
No.
I'll check that out though.
And then a new one I've been listening to is Mastery by Mark Coles. It's
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's very good, and that's more kind of for the people who are looking to start out in a business and start running things. So those three have been very useful for me.
Awesome, mate. I will check those out. So thank you very much for sharing those, Jamie. That's been class. Just finally, mate, if people want to reach out with questions, or they just want to chat to get advice on anything, where would you direct them?
Instagram's probably best for me. It's at Jamie Mackay _SC.
Perfect.
Yeah, most active on there.
Brilliant, mate. Well, thanks a lot for freeing up some time. Hope you have a good Christmas leading into next season as well, and all the best going into next year.
Good stuff. Thanks for having me on, Ben. Really appreciate it.
No problem, mate.